Hey everybody, we've got a Guitar Player magazine, July 1980, from my little stack collection of old vintage Guitar Player magazines and other magazines. This one's from 1980, and what called my attention to this one is Robin Trower, the great British guitar player Robin Trower, on the cover. Now this is 1980. He looks a little more 80s. He doesn't look 70s now. So I don't know about you, but I'm sensitive to the change in music that happened between the 70s and the early 80s when you started having MTV and fashions changing. People cut their hair, and you had new wave and disco. I don't know. So he looks a little different than he did maybe even a couple years before, but no doubt still kicking ass. This was 1980. This Guitar Player magazine, we've looked at a couple. The paper is not quite as good. We looked at that one with Jimmy Page, and that was from, I think, 77. And I had these because in 77 I was in high school, and I would have read all these Guitar Player magazines. By 80, I think I kind of wasn't reading it quite as much. I was moving on to other things. But I've got a little light here. But here's the table of contents. Robin Trower, Tal Farlow, Hawaiian steel guitar. I didn't recognize, some of these didn't recognize as much with me. There's Jimmy Vaughan. Now, is that Stevie Ray Vaughan's brother? I don't know. 1980? I don't know if Stevie Ray Vaughan was on the radar screen back in 1980. Look at here's Gibson ES335, and I always loved the columns and the gear. So I was going to say, I like reading Guitar Player magazine. One thing I have at the right away is I think you can tell the quality of literacy in the United States has gone down because these old magazines, which were written for a broad, generally educated guitar playing public, I think are written at a more educated level, and there's more text. The writing's littler. There's more to read. And I noticed that when I looked at that Jimmy Page one. I said, this article is just plain longer. It's got littler writing, and they were expecting people to read these with some interest. But to me, the columns and the gear ads are also something really interesting. So, maybe I'll edit a little bit, but I just kind of like walking through these. There's an Ibanez. I feel like Ibanez was kind of a new company then, not positive. But I remember hearing about Ibanez around this time. I don't remember it being very much on the radar screen before, maybe the mid-70s. I don't know, you tell me, but here's the publisher. Let me get this light. There we go. Ernie Ball. The thing I always notice, I think other than the interviews and the columns by great guitar players that we all love and admire, one of my favorite things is the ads for all the gear and guitars back in the 70s and early 80s. Again, I don't think the ads are quite as glossy as that 77 one. And, Guitar Player, I quit reading it maybe in the 80s, and I don't know. I'd still pick it up sometimes. It was like something you'd buy at the grocery store back then. I'm not sure about today. There's Jimmy Vaughan. Is that Fabulous Thunderbirds? Yeah, I think is that Stevie Ray's brother? Tell me. I'm not going to read it all. I don't want to make a mistake. MXR. But one of the things I was going to say about the gear ads that's kind of interesting is, of course, there's the companies that you don't see as much. You still see a ton of Fender, Gibson. And, we just saw MXR, Ibanez. Those are, what's this one? There's Gibson. Look at those are Gibson Les Paul Juniors. Look at those sweet guitars. Now, this is a period, supposedly, where guitars weren't that good, remember? But, everyone always talks about the CBS era. And, but I remember that this back when I would read these, there was kind of a lot of the guitar, the kind of cool gear seemed kind of cutting edge back then. There wasn't all this love of vintage stuff. So believe it or not, that would have been cutting edge, a cassette, a 4-track studio. But that's a good example of the gear reviews. I think they're at Tascam. And I had a little 4-track cassette deck once upon a time. I'm sure it sounded horrible. First of all, it probably didn't sound that good anyway, and I'm sure I used it, But I like the gear ads, but a lot of the gear back then had a kind of high tech. I remember that Roland Cube, because I played in a band in Detroit back in these days, right around this time. In a lot of backyards, and then we got so we played in quite a lot of bars and everything down the road a little bit. And I remember one of the guitar player I played with the most probably in that period had a little Roland Cube, and at the time it seemed really high tech. I remember it was just a little dinky Cube amp, and he made it sound pretty good. I think he had to mic it though. Okay. Oh, the Gibson. So you got article. Gibson ZS335. Let's go. Gibson ZS335 is one of American's guitar's great originals, much copied and very rare among the so-called new designs in that it was truly new. Electric Spanish. But I guess what I keep trying to say, and then I get distracted by all the kind of eye candy and the trip down memory lane, is what I find interesting about all these ads are the things you don't see. So, for example, have you noticed any Fender PRS ads? I haven't so far. PRS didn't even exist in 1980. Or what about Taylor? PRS and Taylor, and I'm sure there's some other companies. There's Takamine. Takamine at that time, I remember it seemed kind of like an upper end of guitar. Back then, of course, I was a kid, but I always remember thinking it was a little bit beyond my price range, and people would speak with some reverence about their Takamines, and I think that's interesting. I think that several brands kind of are like that, where between the 80s and the 90s, they kind of went overseas or something, and now we think of them as kind of cheap knockoff brands or something. But I remember Takamines being kind of a hot guitar. I think the Eagles were associated with Takamine, weren't they? That chords. There's Tal Farlow. I've been more interested in jazz guitar. I certainly don't consider myself a jazz guitar player, although I enjoy things with a jazzy flavor, like popular music maybe, and some of the better blues and things that has a jazzy flavor. But I am kind of interested more and more in these hollow-body jazz guitars. But there's Tal Farlow, return of a jazz guitar legend. Satin Dial. I was trying not to get that confused with was it Willie Nelson Paper Dial? The other interesting observation I have is I don't see a lot of tab in here. So I read this magazine all through high school. I maybe read it almost every month. I don't remember this one, but that Jimmy Page one that I reviewed a little while ago, man, when I opened that up, every single article came rushing back, because I read that in the back seat of my parents' car going up north to our farmhouse in Upper Michigan back in high school. And as soon as I opened it, man, and then I had it at our farmhouse all that summer. I mean, I wore that out. And there's a lot of reading in these old guitar player magazines. It wasn't necessarily light reading. You get one of these, it'd take you, you could read it for a month and then keep it around and read it again. Let's see here, we got some Dean. There's a Dean guitar. That's another guitar I tend to think is cheapo, but I don't know, and I don't play it. I like rock, but I consider Dean like a 80s type metal guitar. And I guess if I would always, just me personally, I would never buy a Dean instead of like a Fender or a Gibson. But I don't know. I don't really know that much about Dean. So look at all the people playing Dean back then. Kerry Livgren, Howard Hesse, Howard Leese of Heart. Was that when Roger Fisher was still in Heart? In the early, I thought that was they're kind of like Fleetwood Mac. They had all the romantic drama in their band, Heart. And unlike Fleetwood Mac, they let it ruin they let it hurt their music. Fleetwood Mac let the music rise above their personal. Elliot Easton, okay, that was new back then. See, that's what I mean. I read that Jimmy Page 1977 issue, which is on this channel, and I can tell that 3-year difference, it made a difference. We got some cars here. The styles are a little different. And like I said, some of these are, this one, there's Tal Farlow. Who's that piano player? Tal with Hank Jones. I'll tell you, I admire some of that really hardcore jazz from afar, but some of it's just, I mean, it's got to be, in terms of musical technique, it's got to be up there with playing Bach or something to play some of that stuff really good. Okay, the Morley. It's kind of funny. A lot of the great gear that you buy today is still around. I mean, that big old Morley pedal or some version of it. Look at that. And the other thing I always like is you still had a lot of that hippie art. All through the late 60s and 70s, you had a lot of hippie drawings. And I feel like that kind of faded out. It kind of always looked at the Haight Ashbury or something influence a little bit there. We got the Daion guitar. See, I don't remember them. And I've never heard of them before. Tone, clarity, dependability. Ray Benson of Asleep at the Wheel. Don't buy guitars for their name alone. The fact is you can buy a Daion for a lot less money because you don't pay for an expensive reputation. There's some pickups. More Tal Farlow. Hawaiian steel guitar. Yeah, that 1977 one, I resonated more with some of the articles. Of course, Jimmy Page was the highlight of that magazine. We'd also had, as I recall, just off the top of my head, Jackson Browne and David Lindley. Earl Klugh, which was kind of a George Benson style player back then. So I kind of connected more with some of the articles. And I think the gear, there was a little more color in that one too. I was wondering, in the 80s, magazines started to, I don't know, I feel like times were changing. That the old classic, read a magazine where there's a lot of reading. In old magazines, see a lot of these ads aren't leaping out to me as much as in that 77 issue, but still pretty good to see. Seymour Duncan pickups. Yeah. Get some the old blowaway card. You know what? Who reads magazines anymore? I'm embarrassed to say I don't read magazines. And it just comes back to me how you get these cards and send in for the subscription. I remember Keyboard Magazine. I read that sometimes, and I played drums with the guy that had Modern Drummer Magazine. Was that kind of another one, kind of like that? And I feel like these magazines, if they exist today, I bet they've dummied down the reading level and content. It's like a lot of things. It might have bigger words and more technical language in some cases today, but I think just in terms of the reading level and content and the way they would expect people to read more sustained articles with smaller print, I don't know. We got DiMarzio pickups. Yeah. Tacoma Records. Okay. Sergio Abreu, Brazilian classical master. See, that's someone I'm not familiar with. One thing in high school, I remember reading about José Feliciano. I think he's in that 1977 issue. And I've been a José Feliciano fan ever since reading that article in high school. And I feel like at least a lot of the circles I run with, people don't really take him that seriously if they've heard of him at all. And actually, ever since I read this magazine, I've been a big José Feliciano fan. Here we got, who's here? Is that Frank Zappa? Oh, yeah, Frank Zappa. Steely Dan. That's right around the time Gaucho was coming out, isn't it? And that tells you something because the gear in here, actually, a lot of people would say the gear right around 1980 was some of the best sounding gear ever, including anything they come out with today, which is 40 years later. And that Steely Dan album, Gaucho or Asia, but particularly I think that Gaucho is often considered one of the best sounding albums ever made. a good copy of Gaucho on a vinyl on a good turntable. And I don't know. I bet that's still true today. So the gear in here, don't think this is the primitive days. I mean, they had some great gear back then. I mean, super good sounding stuff. Look at some more drawings. Kind of a little bit more high tech. You know, the 77 one, you still had a lot of kind of Grateful Dead, hippie looking kind of, you know, keep on trucking type art. We're getting a little more high tech, and the lines are getting a little, but still pretty cool drawings all through here. Transducers, that's some interesting pickup technology. You know what? I remember pickups about that. They don't have they don't really, you notice one thing you will not notice in here is an acoustic guitar amplifier, because I don't think they had those to the late 80s. So when all these people tell you about how you have to have an acoustic guitar amplifier, I bet you when Jimmy Page played an acoustic set with Zeppelin, he was playing through a Marshall stack or whatever he was using on an acoustic guitar with one of those little transducers. Boy, I don't remember a lot of these. The Field Mouse, don't know it. Electra, Invicta. If you know some of these brands, let me know. I don't. Here's, oh, look at four year articles. Look at all. I'm telling you, people read less today. I'm convinced of it. And when I look at some of these old magazines, which were the general reading public, this wasn't for like, you know, required reading at some college. This was like for people who pick this up at the grocery store and read it over the weekend or something. You know, read it, you know, sitting it, you know, for fun. Oh, here's we go. De Quisto. You know what? Is that like the Angelico? D'Acquisto, and this is a D'Acquisto strings. Sweet looking. There's Boss. Now some of you can tell me Boss is part of Roland, right? But and I associate Boss with being more of an 80s company. When I was a kid, I was around in the 70s. I don't remember hearing much about Boss, but I'm not trying to say that I would have known. I think the Boss, yeah, because the Boss SD1 and Tube Screamer, I remember seeing back then. So I had a Boss Sonic Distortion, which I think is kind of like the SD1. I don't know. Rick Laird. See, another guy I don't know about Mahavishnu Orchestra, Buddy Rich. There's okay, Leo Kotke. That's great. And this was the heyday of Leo Kotke, I would say. You know, he played here in Atlanta a little while ago. And I talked to a kid who went to see him, actually, and was all excited and said he was just great. One thing the kid did say is Leo Kotke, that's what this kid told me, doesn't play 12 strings anymore. He just all plays, yeah, so I guess he's older now and he doesn't like the extra fights you get from a 12 string. But boy, I remember watching old Leo Kotke on, he's the kind of guy you would have seen like on a PBS special or something back then. In fact, I do think my big exposure to Leo Kotke was some PBS special he did. Maybe some of you saw. I just remember him doing that song Pamela Brown. I guess it all to Pamela Brown. And but all the great 12-string playing. I don't know who that Rick Laird is. Mahavishnu Orchestra. Kind of a late 70s looking type guy there. Not quite hippies anymore. If you didn't want to be, you didn't have to be a hippie anyway. There's a Rickenbacker. We've got the amp, Rickenbacker amp, and I guess a Rickenbacker guitar, huh? Guild. Yeah, Guild, I'm pretty sure was an American company back then, and they're kind of they're another company I think that was really considered kind of high end back then, and they got bought out, and now they sell at least a lot of their guitars come from China, and I don't see them. You know what? They still play fine. Maybe they might even play better than the expensive ones from 1978. But I think the Guild company, you know, you see back here like what was that company we saw like you know. Washburn, some of those companies back then, I think they had more respect at that time, and now they've sold out and gone overseas. Takamine, that was the one I was trying to think of. It was kind of like that. Back then, I remember Takamine was kind Got a lot of black and white ads. I feel like there's more color ads in the other one. Here we go. Who's that? Solid Rock. Oh, sounds like it could be religious. Aria Pro 2. Don't know that. Aria Pro 2. Don't know that. That's cool, though. Yeah. Guitar strings. Got a nice ovation there. Kind of interesting. Yeah, you see a lot of ovation. Okay, this is interesting. Here we have recommended albums for the developing guitarist. All right, you got Doc Watt, and these are some of the great albums of 1980 they're recommending, or I don't know if they came out in 1980, but they're recommending them. Doc Watson, Johnny Smith, some of these. There was always a lot of jazz in here. Tal Farlow, Larry Coryell. Now that's a guy I remember reading about in Guitar Player magazine, and he had a column, and I had a Guitar Player record album that he played a song called Toronto Under the Sign of Capricorn. I just remember that, and it was on that album, and it was kind of just a real kind of strange, jazzy kind of acousticy thing. But I remember listening to it. There's Jeff Baxter, the defense analyst for the Pentagon, Skunk Baxter, distinguished high security clearance government official there, Mr. Skunk Baxter. Okay, this is why I bought this magazine. There's Robin Trower. Okay, I'll probably have to break this up or something. British rock guitar veteran. And you know what? When I bought this, I was hoping for some nice glossy photos. And like I said, I think the Jimmy Page one had some glossy photos, and this is their cover story. It's all black and white. So I'm even wondering if they were cutting some corners already by 1980 compared to the 70s magazines. Robin Trower, Strat. Born in London, Ontario, March 9th, 1945. Well, it's his almost his birthday. I'm doing this on March 2nd. Poison Ivy. He started out in a kind of R&B, which seems funny when you think of Robin Trower. He was in a band called the Paramount. I don't think Robin Trower was on Whiter Shade of Pale. Of course, we're talking about Robin Trower, and he probably most people know he's in Procol Harum, but I don't know if he was on Whiter Shade of Pale or Conquistador, but I'll stand corrected. It's probably in this article. We're not going to read it. He left Procol Harum. Well, maybe he was on Whiter Shade of Pale. But started playing guitar at 14. Played R&B in the Beatles, Ray Charles. For some reason, I think that's funny, but you know that's roots. And you know what? That's a good thing because even if you don't think of Robin Trower, you know, associated with the R&B or the Beatles or bands like that, that shows you that those roots, I'm sure, still shape his playing today. During the 60s. Gretsch Country Gentleman and a Strat he played in those early days. So he left the group called the Paramounts. He doesn't have any formal training. He looks more 80s there. Cut his hair and he's kind of not wearing that. He used to wear those kind of almost like wizard looking clothes in the mid 70s. He wasn't prog rock, I wouldn't say, but you know he kind of, dressed that way, and he definitely had kind of a mystical vibe to his blues. I thought. Kustom. That's a nice amp. See, that's a nice color amp, or color add, kind of glossy. And I feel like there were more of those in the 1977 edition. There's Robin Trower. Vibrato. They're asking him why does he play vibrato so much. I bet he would say it's just how he plays. He doesn't think about it that much. One thing, he talks about bending strings, and he uses a, does he say he uses a 13 gauge, but then tunes down? Man. Hold on. There's Robin Trower. Tell me, there are a lot of, it's probably looking at car company ads or something back in the 20s, you know. GM and Ford and Chrysler would be in there, but you'd have a bunch of other companies and things that didn't make it very much past the Depression. And so there's a lot of ads for companies that don't around anymore. Look at that. He's talking about how you use pedals, but then they would kill your sound. So is that buffering? What's he talking about there? You know what? I'm going to talk about that separately. Yeah, he's talking about In City Dreams. I think he's talking about electro harmonics here. He's talking about Mike. I think that's the guy from Electro Harmonics. You need an electric Mistress flanger. Yeah. I associate Robin Trower with really cool effects, not just sort of vintage clean, but also kind of old school effects, like, you know, this good fuzz, delay, univibe, of course. I think he says some things about bridge of size here. No, I don't know that guitar player. Do you? Jay Gradon. Okay, yeah, yeah. Didn't he play on? He kind of like Dean Parks. He was on some of this big Steely Dan solo studio stuff, right? He's talking about how loud he plays. Robin Trower. He says, "Do you know where to stand on stage to obtain specific feedback responses?" So he moves around the stage. He gets different sounds. That's old school playing live and loud. I feel like that doesn't matter as much digital, but all those little two loud stage volumes, and you can move around, get different sounds depending on where you were standing. And I hear it too. You get different sounds, so like you could bring your Strat way down, and just the volume control on your Strat, and it would sound way different. Put it down to 1 or 2. I feel that's a great technique. I saw Rhett Schill talk about that. Turn your, you know, and then sometimes you don't need all those pedals if you know how to use the volume control right, or the tone control, because you can crank it and then turn it way down for rhythms and things, and you get really different tones. So. Jimi Hendrix. In the past, you've been compared to Jimi Hendrix and even criticized by some for sounding too much like him. How much of an influence has his music been on you? In response to the first part, bullshit. Those people haven't heard Hendrix and they haven't heard me, or else they wouldn't say that. Hendrix definitely opened up a lot of doors. He changed the language, rewrote the language of the electric guitar. I felt, right or wrong, that there was no way you could move forward without absorbing at least part of what he created. You know what? I can see why people say Trower is a Hendrix style guitarist, but I wouldn't say just some kind of a Hendrix wannabe clone or something, or a tribute to Hendrix cover act. He plays his own songs. He plays them his own way, and he's one of the great guitar players, right up there with Hendrix, as far as I'm concerned. Speaking of, well, is that a posthumous album? Does anyone know that one? 9 to the Universe. Ibanez pedals, analog delay, flanger. Did they have much digital delay back then yet? I wasn't that into pedals back then, and of course I was a kid, so I mean I wasn't, and always trying to scrape by. My parents would buy me some stuff, but I couldn't just walk in a music store and buy anything I wanted, so I didn't. There we go. You'll love us for our bodies. Okay. Okay, now we have some of these columns. There's Larry Carlton. Look, there's an old picture of Larry Carlton. Gibson TP6. Is that an ES335? What's a TP6? Gibson TP6 fine-tuning tailpiece. So it must be on the ES335 that he's using. Gives you performance perfection in concert of the studio fingertip ease. For the first time, you can tune with one hand while you're playing, and you don't have to own a Gibson to get the benefit of precision tuning. Pretty cool. Is that Toy Caldwell for Marshall Tucker? Oh, look, died. Oh, Tommy Caldwell, 30-year-old bassist for the Marshall Tucker Band, died on April 28th from serious injuries he received in a car accident on April 22nd. Oh, my goodness. A little bit of a... These are kind of like the obituaries. Boy, they'd have a heck of a memorial wall now compared to 1980, wouldn't they? All the dead guitar players. Phil Holden, John Entwistle's custom H. So these are the columns. I used to like these. That's a Carvin. Now Carvin, I'm not sure when they came out, but they're one of these bands or brands that I remember in the 80s, and I always thought they were kind of high tech, and I always thought they kind of didn't seem quite as rock and roll. They'd be like, you'd see like Bebop Deluxe or kind of the new edgy bands would have Carvins. And they were kind of a high-tech company, or all their stuff kind of seemed like it was modern players. And I always kind of was more Fender, Strat, Gibson, if I could afford them, which I could not have, but that would have been my okay. Tommy Tedesco. The other thing I wanted to say is I remember back then reading. I read this, Guitar Player for several years, pretty much almost every month. Some I remember better than others, maybe missed some, but no tab. Look at that. That's not tab. So that's interesting. Solid spruce top, $190. Kamursaka. Jimmy Stewart guitar notebook, not to be confused with It's a Wonderful Life. Shenandoah. The great movie he made with John Wayne, which was the last movie John Wayne ever made, The Shootist. But that's not that Jimmy Stewart, I don't think. That'd be a shocker if it was Jimmy Stewart, the iconic. Here we go, another one. No tab. See that? No tab. There. Carlos Santana. Another company, I was going to say with these ads, I keep, it's hard to walk through these. You keep getting distracted by everything you're looking at. But I meant to say, you don't see any Taylor ads in here. And you also don't see PRS. And I remember Carlos Santana was a big Gibson Les Paul guy, or SG back then. And sometimes I'll read in forums, people think he should have never gone to PRS. Now you always see him playing a PRS. Mesa Boogie. Steel string, so is that pedal steel? BC Rich guitars, definitely some, definitely. Is that classical? Or recital? You know, it's pretty serious. That'd be like, serious the evolution and future of the guitar. Boy, we're already at 35 minutes, but it sure be nice. I'm going to read every one of these articles, and if I'll maybe do some shorter ones where they kind of focus in a little bit on some of these. There's that Larry Coryell. There's Julie, and look, well, I guess we got some tab there, don't we? And I don't know if we had tab in the 70s, but I remember reading this a lot, and I don't remember seeing a lot of tab. There's another cool drawing. I've learned to admire some of those drawings. You just see whatever you're looking at when you see cool drawings. It's always a good thing. Somebody did something by hand. Fretboard basics, harmonic minor fingerings. Look at this magazine back then. Bill Lawrence pickups. Are they still around? Get some of the bass guitar. Crate. Okay, Crate's still around. Now, Crate's another company that I remember thinking was kind of cool, or at least it'd be something like I'd see a guy with a Crate. It'd sound pretty good. Now I think that's considered a cheapo, right? Kind of funny. I think a lot of these companies sold out or something, or we for some reason perceive them as being cheapo today. Randall, look at that. It looks just like a Marshall stack, doesn't it? Guitar synthesizers, David Friend. John Carruthers, Guitar Workshop neck stabilization. Sigma. Hondo. You know what? I just don't know. Okay, you get some albums. Jim Shore. Does anybody know any of those? Arlen Roth. Jorma Carcona. Lenny Bro. Scorpions. I feel like music was changing. Albert Collins. Charlie Bird. Sugarloaf Sweet. Look at all these great guitar players back then. Still in their prime. A lot of these guys are dead now. There's Legend Musical Instruments. Never heard of them. That looks like Sonny Bono. I don't know, that must be staff engineer. I'm say it's Sonny Bono. You know what? Okay, here's one night there at Clapton. That's a good album. That's the one he did with Albert Lee. That's the one where you used to hear that cocaine all the time. Is that the one that was recorded in Japan? And he kind of played like a kind of a Japanese sounding. And that one, the Japanese went crazy. Yeah, some good guitar playing on that album for sure. The Emersons, Sonny Rollins, golly, Triumph. Western Swing. Man. It's new. Okay, let's see what's new. That looks like Lindsey Buckingham's guitar there, doesn't it? But I don't think it is. But I don't know much about Lindsey Buckingham's. That guitar you always see Lindsey Buckingham play looks sort of like that. I don't know. You know what? I'm sure in a lot of cases, no. But some of this gear back then, I bet it sounds as good as anything they have today. Some of it. Because there was some, look at that music back then. It sounded great. The vinyl records, all that stuff. Really, I wouldn't say anything I haven't seen all that much, and I think today sounds better than older equipment. Sometimes it might be easier or something like that. But Music Man. All right, well, that's it. This one, I didn't see a Fender ad much in there, did I? You know what? There's Fender acoustic guitars. I don't see an ad for Fender Strat in there. And then there's a Fender acoustic guitar in the back cover. I guess Fender paid the big bucks for their acoustics. And, I like a Fender acoustic. I've got a Fender acoustic guitar. I've got it tuned in Nashville tuning. But you know what? I bought it for $200 to play, to give to one of my sons. He didn't end up playing it much, but I've used it. I've taken it on retreats. It tunes up great, So, yeah, Fender acoustic instruments. That's good. Well, that's Guitar Player Magazine. Like I said, I kind of wanted to focus on the Robin Trower aspect, but some ways I think the 1977 one has more color in it. This is more black and white, and the paper maybe even looks a little cheaper. I don't know. It's kind of funny that we're going forward in time, and I would say there's less color in this one than in the 77 one, but still fascinating. And I stand by my comment that I think the reading public, I don't know if our attention spans are shorter, but there are a lot of good in-depth articles in this magazine, and they came out with one of these things every single month. So definitely worth reading back then and still today. Thanks. God bless.